another reasoning that I've seen people just invite too many people. It's all in good spirits and the motive is right, which is kind of inclusion and diversity. But it has to be balanced. You can't just blanket everybody in the spirit of diversity and inclusion and then get 15, 20, 30 people in a meeting. You can still have inclusion and diversity with a group of 5 to 8 people. Welcome. This is The Way with Artin and Michael. So today we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, meetings and just many, many meetings, and how to have less of them, actually. So I want to start by sharing a few points of data. So there was a recent survey done by Korn Ferry. If you're not familiar with Korn Ferry, it's a consulting firm. So they do these type of surveys and very respected. So here's some of the survey results. More than 2/3, so about 67%, respondents said that spending too much time in meetings and on calls distracts them from making an impact at work, which, as you can imagine, if the purpose is finding some time for deep work, well, the more time you spend in meetings, well, less time for deep work. The other one was, more than a third say they waste about 2 to 5 hours a week on calls or meetings that don't accomplish anything. I mean, I can relate to that. Michael, I think you can probably relate to that too.
Absolutely.
35% say they go to a meeting even if they knew it wasn't going to be productive instead of declining the meeting. And I think that speaks to probably cultural issues and just not having the right technique and skills to get out of meetings. And I think in a future episode, we'll talk about that, because while this one is very specific around how to have efficient meetings, we'll touch on how do you get out of inefficient meetings as well.
And I'm going to cheat just for a minute on this particular one, because actually today I had somebody who's reaching out to me around a meeting that we're having just on a different side business front. And in that scenario, they're like, hey, can you jump on? I'm like, what are we jumping on for? And actually really trying to help refine down to an agenda. And my subtle way of doing that was also like, okay, great. How long do we need to, how quickly can we tackle this? Because I have a packed schedule, but I might be able to arrange some time for us to get it in. And it's like, there's these little things that you could do where it's like, I'm doing you a solid. I'm going to try my best, but it forces the other individual to start thinking about, oh, okay, we're limited on time. What can we do? Which we'll get into later is always what somebody should be thinking about, which is really how long do we actually need to tackle the problem at hand?
Yep, very true. Let's see, what was the next survey result? So when asked what scenario leads to the greatest impact at work, the majority of respondents, so 64%, said that one-on-one conversation with the colleagues is what drives the best results for them, which is interesting because typically it's always group settings, but majority have said that the one-on-one conversations are actually the most important. And then for more than half, the 54% of respondents, less than 70% of the workday is spent accomplishing productive work tasks, which is crazy. Just how much time we spend in meetings. And then the last one I want to bring up is about half say they feel judged professionally by the number of hours they spend on a job. And they say all work and no play is ineffective, which I think just talks about, again, the issue with how many hours you're in a meeting versus doing work, and not being in a meeting, you get judged by it because like, how come this person is not in a meeting? Yeah. So there's some peer pressure to actually attend unnecessary meetings. And, obviously these meetings have a cost associated with them too.
Right. Well, and there's a way I used to look at meetings where I wanted to get, and people sometimes chuckled at this, especially at that time, I would say probably more senior leaders who were used to operating the way that they operated, which was often very heavy meeting because, some of them, and this isn't the case for all, but some of them may not be as, their style might not be drop it and let's talk about it in Slack. Or their style might not be, do it over a chat. Their style might be, let's meet about it. And therefore, sometimes that influences the culture a lot. But what I wanted to get was a sort of hybrid clock calculator where you put in the average hourly rate of each person that was going to be in that room. And then you started it. and you could see a dollar number going up every time, because when you're captivating everybody in here, that means it's at a cost. And hey, even more crazy if there was a way to be able to cost, or capture the dollars lost because they weren't actually focused on productive stuff. But the idea is in this meeting, if everybody's average hourly rate, because you had a bunch of executives and other stuff, and there was $100 and you had 20 people in this meeting, then that's 2,000. Wait, is that right? No, hold on. Where's my math? What numbers did I? I said 20 people, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you have
That are
20
making,
people,
yeah, 100. Okay. Yeah, my math is down. $2,000 is what that hour would cost you. Did you get $2,000 of value out of that meeting? And it could get even, higher in some cases, depending on who's in the meeting. But that's how you should ask. Did we walk out of this meeting with $2,000 in value? Something else that you had said too about the one-on-ones and people finding it more effective, not shocking. But there's this really interesting, I don't know if you say formula I'd come across in the past. It's n times n minus 1 divided by 2, basically talks about the number of lines of communication. And I think this is the other big challenge with meetings, is that what it means basically is if you have one person, or one-on-one, you have the one line of communication. Basically, it can't go anymore. But the minute you continue to build on that, as soon as you get to 10 lines of communication, 10 people in a meeting, that's 45 lines of communication. That's chaos. And that's what I think people miss. They think they're being more productive when they add a bunch of people into this, meeting, but they're actually increasing complexity, and it sometimes makes things worse, let alone ownership of things, which again, we'll talk about in a minute, but a
yeah,
passionate topic, because darn it, there's too many meetings out there.
as you were saying that, I'm so curious. I wonder if any large company has ever systematically tackled a cost saving initiative to reduce meetings. I wonder if any company has done that. Because to me, it's an opportunity. I mean, if you want to talk about cost saving, especially in today's climate, well, reduce your meetings. You're gonna free up a lot of people's time to do actual work that's needed. Um, and you mentioned the lines of communication 10. Well, do you remember the meetings we were in, 10 years ago at Disney? About 50 people in a conference room. And then every week it felt like Groundhog Day because we'd talk about the same thing, but nothing got accomplished. It's like 50 people. That's a conference now. It's no longer a meeting.
Absolutely. And again, in that particular case, it was one of those, though, where oftentimes we did feel like we needed to be there, because if we weren't, then we were showing lack of support, for the team. And again, we found different approaches and ways that we'd handle that in the future. But a
So
lot of
where
that
do you
comes down
think
to,
where do you think these meetings go wrong? Like,
well, I was just going to say leadership is key for some of that. Like, somebody needs to have this role and have a goal for the meeting, and then they need to help to shepherd the meeting through that. And then from there, you also need to have a method to the madness of how you actually are then going to follow up on some of these action and other items. But I would say, starting with it, if we would just kind of pick it out to simplify it a bit more, first off, a lack of clear objectives. And if people don't have that and a clear agenda when they go into it, I think you're already set up for defeat.
yeah, I think if you get a meeting invite and there's no agenda, you should ask for it. Because it's only
Always.
fair to everybody attending that meeting to come prepared, even for the person that's scheduling that meeting.
Yeah.
It's to their benefit for people to come prepared. Otherwise, you're going to waste 40 minutes just chatting about what is this meeting about. Yeah, lack of clear objective and no agenda is where a lot of meetings go
And,
wrong that I've seen.
and by the way, I think that's another one of those, I don't know if you call it hack because it sounds so straightforward, but it's a struggle for some people, is you should ask that question right away. And that's actually a way that a lot of meetings end up getting canceled or killed, because if the person can't answer that question very well, they sometimes, having been asked that, it sometimes forces them to say, oh, okay, fair point. Or just say, let me stop by and just quickly give you a high level. And then you could solve it maybe in a 2-minute instead of, 30-minute, or some people's default an hour-long meeting to tackle the subject. And actually on that topic too, there's another stat that we had come across when we were researching this too, about the fact that I think it was a Microsoft, study mentioned, two things actually. One of the things they mentioned was, just the cost in general of these ongoing meetings. And I can't remember, I think it was somewhere around like 36 billion, or was it even higher?
That's great.
Yeah. No, it's ridiculous. And honestly, it might have been higher. But on top of that, too, there was another part of their study that was really interesting as well, which is that they've noted that over the past 20 years or so, whatever you want to call it, like people's attention spans have decreased by like 12 seconds. That was like in 2000 to now 8 seconds today, or actually 2015. So today, maybe it's 3 seconds. But it's even harder for them to maintain attention in these meetings. And I think that's another key reason why, back to what we just mentioned so far, having clear objectives and being able to make sure that they're planning and organizing the meetings properly is so important.
Yep. Yep. I think one of the other reasons why some meetings are fail or not just productive enough is the planning that goes around them. And it's just not organized. People just will set up these recurring meetings without any real logic or reason behind it. And when there is no purpose to a meeting and what you're trying to actually accomplish, with the right people too. Like if you're planning a meeting and you need a decision for X, but there is nobody in the meeting that can make the decision for X, well, it's a waste of everybody's time because one is
Yeah.
organized in a poor way. So you need to make sure the right people are there, but not 50 people. The right people are just a very small handful of people.
Yeah. So I think something that's important there too that you say, because I remember seeing this too often, um, because people didn't plan it very well. Uh, you would show up to a meeting and sometimes you'd realize, great, we don't even have the person in here who needs to answer the question. Or you would find that the person invited everybody because they weren't clear on who they needed to ask, and or they just didn't do a very good job of saying, here's my goal of this meeting. So it's like it's a catch-all and they had everybody in there. Bosses can sometimes do that because they see everybody on the team is working for them, and it can get a bit ridiculous. But so in that case too, it's like you got to be really thoughtful about who should be in the meetings. And I think it ties back to what we were saying before about what we start creating with lines of communication, but also like, I don't know, trying to tie this somehow military, I guess. Any good general, you don't want to have your entire, force in there with you at any one point. You need them out there doing their job in the battlefield as well.
Yeah. And, another reasoning that I've seen people just invite too many people. It's all in good spirits and the motive is right, which is kind of inclusion and diversity. But it has to be balanced. You can't
Yeah.
just blanket everybody in the spirit of diversity and inclusion and then get 15, 20, 30 people in a meeting. Uh, it, you can still have inclusion and diversity with a group of 5 to 8 people.
Yeah. So I want to paint this picture real quick, like, because when you said that, like, there are two things that came to my mind. Um, and I'll use an example from Disney and Netflix, because again, every company, they have things that they're good at, and then they have things that they struggle at. So at Netflix, back to what you had mentioned before about the idea of somebody saying what's their agenda. It's like people knew better. You had to set a meeting with an agenda. It was rare that somebody didn't. The culture there, the way that was created, like everybody's schedule's busy, just this really sort of high performance team. It's like, you know that you have to have that. And absolutely somebody would ask right away of, okay, great. Where's the agenda? What are we talking about? And there was this obligation. You better include it. Whereas then if we think about it, over at Disney, that wasn't really the culture as much. So that was I'd say a negative there. But back to the Netflix Disney comparison here. When I was at Netflix, there's and transparency is such a key part of the culture there, which I very much appreciate, as is inclusion. But what that meant, and the way people interpreted that, is they wanted to be on the invite for every meeting and have the option to go to the meeting if they wanted to. But I think you're missing the point when you do that, because just because you could have everybody there and you're creating this level of transparency, you are only feeding this horrible problem of meetings, because now that means the person may not be able to get to the other key tasks and things that they needed to do, or like they're only going to give 50%, 25% to their other efforts, because now they're suddenly divided over here. And it's like, no, this is what this person's job is. So that was a struggle there. Whereas I feel like over at Disney, that was something where people didn't expect it as much. Although I wish Disney had more transparency.
Yeah, that's very true. Um, what else? What else? I think we already touched on kind of this overwhelmance of attendance. Like that's where a lot of meetings go wrong and engagement lacks. People don't really know what's being discussed because the planning is poor. Like I feel like overwhelming of attendance encompasses every other issue that bad meetings have. And then I also think that accountability and the lack of follow-ups is a at the back end of a meeting is what causes bad meetings. Because if you're having meetings to meet a goal or set some objectives, well, there's going to be some action items. There's going to be things that people have to do. And if there's no accountability on what people have to do and the follow up is not there, then that meeting was a waste. So that it
Yeah.
all comes back to, I think, the organization of the meeting as well and the person running the meeting from a leadership perspective.
Yeah. I agree with that. And my tactic I used to always try to do is after a meeting, as immediately as I could afterwards, worst case, before the end of the day, there would be a recap with an action plan. I worried a little less about like step by step recap, although that could be valuable for people who weren't there. But for sure, here are the action items. Here is responsible for it. And I personally liked having those things feed some sort of a project management or a tool or task management tool so that the team and stuff was aware. I know you tried stuff like that also in the past, but like that's critical. You need to be able to make sure that those action items follow when it's fresh and that people know who's actually accountable. And then preferably, but whatever it is, if somebody had a deliverable of X, drop it on the calendar so that somebody knew when that, was, so that there's again, that sort of tight accountability to it. So it's just not lost and
Yeah.
forgotten.
I feel like in 2023, uh, meeting notes and action items, if it's not there, there is a problem. Because with AI now, there's a bunch of tools in the marketplace that can actually transcribe your entire meeting, summarize it, and then give you action items. It might not be perfect, but at least it's a starting point, and you can edit that to be fine. I mean, it makes it so easy to have a summary and action items after meeting that shame on you if you're not doing it.
Yeah, Firefly is one of those tools, and literally, some people may have seen it, but if you haven't, you basically invite it to the meeting, and you would see it. Like if this was a shared screen where you'd see in the corner, you'd see Firefly because Firefly would be listening as a member, and then from there, Firefly can get you summaries, action items. Like there's ways to be able to do that, and they're only going to continue to improve and get better. So yeah, I think it replaces the admin or assistant of the past who might have been doing that, to your point, it means it's hard to have the excuse of why there were no action items if you have that
Yep.
available.
Yep.
I think, by the way, though, what that could create though is this weird thing, and again, I'll take this back to the example with Netflix is with all the transparency. Well, double-edged sword again, because that means all of these documents and all of these other things are available for people. And at times people are like, well, didn't you read the minutes? It's like, but you can now have minutes for 50 meetings you couldn't make because they were at the same time. Expectations of who's actually responsible again is really important there.
Very, very good point. Um, what else? Anything else we haven't touched on as far as what makes them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that covers most of them. I think just because we did talk about, in inclusiveness a little bit before, I think in a meeting, something else that's really important is that people are considering and making sure they hear from all the voices in the room. I think especially when you're doing remote calls, it's become even more evident to me. I don't know that it's actually any worse than it was in the past, but it's become more evident where you now can pay attention to the fact that, oh, we haven't really heard from this person over here. When you're in a room, you might not notice that as much because there's just a different energy and banter that's happening there. But now I've seen it a lot more. And I had a team member who was really good about being like, okay, pause for, a certain amount of time. His was well over 10 seconds. Like for me, that's, oh, it's too uncomfortable. But he was really good about doing that because he wanted to make sure those on the other side of the screen had a chance to be able to, jump in and be able to add anything they want. And I think there's a specific study that was done, and it's a University of Malmo. I have a note on here, and basically they had mentioned that as a general rule here, what was it? It was men generally dominated the meetings and spoke for 75% of the time, leaving only 25% for women to contribute. So I think it's really important for anybody who's in the meeting to remember that and keep it in mind, just to make sure they're not hogging it all, but also to actually pause and ask the question of the other person in the room and point to them and say, Artin, anything else that you'd like to add to this topic?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point because there's always, you have the loud voices always, the ones that do talk. So I think leadership, whether it's from a seniority perspective or just you as leading a meeting, you should be very aware of who is that loudmouth extrovert and who's that introvert, and control that and make sure that voices are being heard. And it's not just those extroverts that want to talk, 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 and just listen to themselves are controlling the room.
Yep. Completely
The
agree.
other one that I think we didn't touch on is just because there's an option to select a 60-minute meeting or a 30-minute meeting doesn't mean that you should. Maybe it
Right.
should be 15 minutes. So don't, just because every meeting is 30 or 60 minutes, because that's the option, shorten it. If you think you can solve it in 10 minutes, just set up a 10-minute meeting. Like we shouldn't just take up the time just because it's easy to select 30 minutes versus a couple of more clicks to change it to 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. There's this in people's minds, it has to be either 30 minutes or an hour. I appreciate sometimes individuals who would set it for 45 minutes because they also are like, well, there might be travel time because you got to get to the office or whatever it is. We're on a studio lot. It could be walking, across the way. And then because Parkinson law kicks in, which is the idea that we fill the amount of time we have allocated to something. So if you only have 30 minutes, you'll work to figure out how you can solve it in 30 minutes. If you have an hour, you'll take the hour. If you're doing a 2 hour, you could probably figure out how to fill it for 2 hours. In fact, we've been in plenty of meetings where we walked out of after 2 hours and you're like, okay, that was, not so worth it. And
Yeah,
I think there's,
that was an email.
yeah, exactly. And on that note, there's actually a good framework that we could link out here too, but you know, can we, if somebody asks the questions of, can we have a meeting? You could respond back with, well, could it be an email? If just asking that question, the person says yes, then it's like, well, there's the answer, no meeting. But if they say no, then that's where you follow it up. Like we were saying before, with, do you have an agenda? If the answer is no, well, then no. If the answer is yes, cool. Can it be under 30 minutes? I'm really busy. Yes. Well, okay then. And I think people could kind of have that framework that then helps to be able to narrow it down enough to hopefully minimize the amount of meetings that, they would have. And
Yes.
I want to mention two more actually. I'll call it pet peeves for me with meetings, and maybe to each their own on this one. But like uh, Friday afternoon meetings, just stop doing it. Don't do it. That's horrible. Like people are wrapping up their week, maybe making some plans for like the next week. Like what I would like to do is be like, here's my agenda. Here's what I'm tackling next Monday. And like, it's really important that whenever those meetings came at 4 or 5 o'clock, it's like the brain power, everything isn't there. And the other one is the attendee, because when we say all this, it's easy to make it sound like it's the leader of the meeting, is responsible. And they are responsible to keep it on track, but attendees got to be good attendees too. And people who show up 15 minutes or more late, like we've had those. There's been people before where it's like, hold on, I got to text the person's name I will not say that starts with the letter N, and say, you coming? Uh, and that was like their trigger. Oh, I got to go. I'm being called to my next meeting. And that's also not, healthy. You need to show up to a meeting on time unless you scheduled in advance, and let them know you'd be running late because of, another meeting.
There are those cultural things that we hear about certain companies that, if you're not there within 5 minutes, they close the door on you, or things like Jeff Bezos's pizza size meetings, where if you can't feed the room with a single pizza, then it's too big of a meeting. Uh,
Yeah.
those obviously exist in other companies, which I really appreciate because I think it kind of reinforces and helps to keep some of these rules intact.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites too. I always love that. I leveraged it, at different times as well. But like that's great. Something else that Amazon's known for, and again, I would say Netflix was decent at this one too. Was having in advance people being clear on, here's what we're going to discuss. Here is the 1 sheet, 2 sheet, whatever it is that you need to come prepared to speak to. And I think there's two ways to approach it. One of them, I do like it if you could say in advance, read this, but I also recognize sometimes people are in back to backs. So what was also nice in some scenarios I've seen is some people would say, hey, first 15 minutes of this meeting are going to be to read the doc. If you've already done so, you've just earned 15 minutes of that time back. Just make sure you show up when we start discussing it 15 minutes in. And I think that's a nice way too, because sometimes that struggle can be somebody actually carving out the time. And I'd rather have the time in the front of the meeting for them to do that than risk them coming in, skimmed through it, not really able to speak to it, but pretend that they can, which also happens plenty of times.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, this is a good segue. We talked about what are things that cause a meeting to be bad. Well, if you've gone through the decision criteria and you've said, yes, I need a meeting, uh, how can you make sure your meeting is effective, which you touched on, making sure that it's clear and the objectives are known. You limit the attendance to make sure that you're not inviting everybody. And there's a time limit. And whether people need to come in early or 15 minutes in if they've done the homework, and then end on time. I think that's just so important, that the timing, because time, you got to respect people's time. Even outside of work, I'm a stickler about being on time to places, because it's just I think it's just being a human and valuing everybody else's time. And then what else would you add to that, Michael? Like, what else should you do to have a good meeting?
So I think you need to be selective about reoccurring meetings, because too many people are just like, oh yeah, we should just do this all the time. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I like the role instead where I'm like, unless there's a specific thing we're trying to get to and we know that we are coming in to review those things and we've already picked out the milestones, I believe that you should first have that meeting a couple of times, preferably at the shorter length, and then only extend it or make it reoccurring if you realize that the meeting has that purpose that's going to, invite it. I do believe in reoccurring meetings for things like one-on-ones, and probably the reoccurring sort of team/stat meeting just should still be done, thoughtfully. And I think we mentioned it before too. The other one is just encouraging people to be both prepared but also to participate, because I think that's really important. Everybody comes in, the meeting goes a lot better when they have done the steps that they need to, such as reading something in advance. And then the participation side of it, again, pull people in, but at the same time, that's a job as a leader. But the other important job, and I should have maybe put this in my pet peeve list, is a lot of people might come in and they may be on their laptop and phones. And look, you and I did that sometimes in meetings, partially because we showed up to the meeting because we needed to be at that meeting, but it was probably not the best organized meeting, meaning we were only needed for 10 minutes of the meeting.
Yep.
But I'd heard in the past about a technique that I thought was like a pretty sneaky way to get people's devices away from them. A company had set up a little area for recharging over by the door. So by default, when you came in, you would plug your device in so it would recharge, which then meant when you were sitting in the meeting, you're engaged. So a
That's
brilliant
clever.
little hack.
That's very clever.
Yeah. And then I think too, like back to, should this even be a meeting? People really need to embrace, alternate communication channels. It's like asynchronous works, perfectly fine. Email sometimes works for something. Project management software could work for things. Slack, or some people like Discord. I still haven't quite got into that one myself, but there's these other methods that people can use for communication that I also think is important. And look, I shoulder taps I want to avoid as much as possible, but every now and then the type of conversation you have might be something you could have solved in a 2-minute conversation versus the meeting itself as well.
And email and
Oh,
Slack are as effective as well if you just want a quick answer.
yeah, great point. And I think the other thing too is people need to continually assess these meetings. Like something I would do with my team, and I think you did as well, was regularly, if not quarterly. I would have, and definitely once a year, I would go through and I would give the team the challenge to look at your meetings and see which ones you can get rid of, and almost like make your meetings fight to be on your calendar. And it's important, I think, sometimes to create that sort of framework and safety for the team members to do that. Because look, if they want to cancel something I have regularly with them, they should tell me the same thing, because it's beneficial for all of us. We could take on more, position everybody better for their careers, because they're able to, learn more, grow more, add more value, because they're not just stuck in the meeting all the time. But I also think that the other a critical thing with that is it gives them permission to then reach out to some of the partners that they may have felt obligated to be in and be like, hey, my boss has challenged me to go through my calendar and reevaluate all my meetings. So I thought it was a great opportunity for us to ask ourselves, is this meeting the right, cadence? Is it the right length? are there other ways we can tackle this? And I think doing that is huge to be able to help give them permission to step out of that when they otherwise feel an obligation.
Yeah, I see that happen only when companies are in crisis mode,
100%.
instead of making it a regular thing. Like I heard so many stories during the early months of COVID with all the furloughs going on. You have a
Yeah.
bunch of people that are furloughed, the work didn't stop. So all of a sudden, companies were asking, well, how do we cut meetings to make sure that we can pick up the slack of everybody else that's furloughs? It's like, well, if you're able to do that during a time of crisis, why not do it all the time? Because then it begs the question of, did you even need to hire all those people? If you just cut some of the meetings out, you can have a more well-rounded, high-performing team.
Yeah. Well, here's something else I'll add to it because I have that specific stat now I was going to mention. So it's the study by National Statistics Council estimated that unnecessary meetings cost businesses approximately $37 billion in the United States each year. That's just the US. And on average, employees spend approximately 31 hours per month in unproductive meetings, according to a study by Atlassian. I bet you the number is even higher. It depends on the company. That alone, when companies are turning to layoffs, well, imagine instead if you had proactively resourced these individuals to things that could drive more of those, whether be it new product, be it sales, be it wherever they're focused in. If they were actually able to focus on that, then you might have actually found that the layoffs were less necessary. So I would say try to redirect them first. And then, from there, if you get to a point where there still needs to be the case for a layoff, that's one thing. But if you can redirect people first and let them try to solve a problem by resourcing their time more efficiently, then there's $37 billion right there, not counting the opportunity costs that you could also consider as part of that.
Yeah, yeah.
What I want to just walk through real quick, like here, is there's this meeting workflow diagram that the Harvard Business Review put together, and I'll just walk through it real quick, like here, it's called "Should I Hold a Meeting?" and we can link out to it as well. But ultimately, it starts off with, "Have I thought through the situation?" If the answer is no, schedule time for strategic thinking. And again, that's how a leader can better determine whether or not, this is, if they're ready to move forward. Okay. So if they've thought through the situation and the answer is yes, then you ask, do I need outside input to make progress? If the answer is no, schedule time for doing the work. If the answer is yes, does moving forward require a real-time conversation? If the answer is no, send an email. If the answer is yes, you then ask, does this necessitate a face-to-face meeting? If the answer is no, use chat, call, or schedule a video conference. If the answer is yes, schedule and prepare for the meeting. I think if people could even just do that in advance, you will find that there's a great reduction of meeting. And I think that's something that any individual hearing this can do. And I think another thing that anybody listening to this, this might be a helpful tool to share this particular podcast with their colleagues. It's a nice way to be able to say, hey, much like I was talking
Indirectly,
about.
you could say, it's more like an indirect approach rather than being direct about it.
That's it. You just simply say, hey, I think there might be some opportunity here. Hearing some of these stats and other things in here is crazy. Plus, let's face it, we're all really busy and we need to find more time. So there's some tactics and techniques in this particular podcast that we might be able to leverage. And then share this in advance and then say, let's be ready to spend 10 minutes on our next staff meeting or whatever conversation, seeing if there's anything we want to take away and implement.
Yeah, and just by doing that, it makes you come across as somebody who cares and is thinking about innovative solutions to
Yeah.
increase revenue, reduce costs, something that benefits the company. So do share this with people that you feel like might be overextending meetings for you.
Yeah. Hey, if we could just save 3 hours a meeting per person, then
We've done our job. That's it.
yeah,
We will, yeah, we'll sleep happy. Well, to that point, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And as Michael said, please share with friends because I think this episode could help a lot of people. And if you have any comments, leave them below or shoot us an email. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching.